Good morning, or good evening, as the case may be for many of you. How are you all doing today? Yesterday, I did the live session outside. Some of you may have caught that with me, and I couldn't see anything on the screen because of the reflection. So today, I'm feeling especially prepared. I'm inside. And I've actually got my phone with me so I can try and catch some of the comments along the way. So, if you see me looking down, that is precisely what I am looking at. So many awesome topics that we are yet to get through and have already started with. Let me see how we're doing. Good morning, Nan. Yay, lovely to see you. Good morning. How are you all doing? What's the plan for the rest of the day? I think we're due for some quite heavy rain here today, and I know some of you, especially if you're in Australia, could be up for that as well. So I hope you get some relief from the heat. Good morning, Fiona. Good morning, or good evening. Sorry, good evening, Fiona, and good evening, Noreen. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Dale. Yay, so many awesome faces. So today's topic is a particularly interesting one, and it's something that I've been exploring a lot because overwhelmingly there is the feeling of not being good enough, or that belief of not being good enough, is the primary thought process that I come across. I would say that dealing with feelings of anxiety and how that manifests in our writing, and how that can either really provide us with a roadblock and stop us from where we're going, from where it is that we want to go. That, coupled with the feeling of not good enough and a lack of worthiness, is, I would say, the kind of big kahunas. They're the ones that I have so many conversations about, and I'm struck just how many of us feel that way. Good morning, Lorraine. Yay. Hi, Emma. And the realization that I've come to after having literally like hundreds of conversations, mainly with women, and that's because it's mainly women that I tend to attract and tend to draw to me work-wise. So hundreds of conversations with women, and for the most part, all of us feel on some level that we're not good enough. And all of us struggle with a sense of worthiness and the need to be able to recognize experiences and triggers which take us into feelings of shame, or activate that belief system within us. And the reason for that is because I think it's a very human condition. It's a really universal condition. And understanding that if you are in a position where that is a dominant thought process for you, where you feel not good enough, where you feel out of your league, where you feel like your sense of worthiness and your sense of belonging is constantly being challenged, depending on how much work you've done in this area and how how developed your shame resilience and your worthiness resilience is, it will affect us in different ways. However, it's active for all of us because this is just a part of navigating life in a way that allows us to stay open-hearted and to stay vulnerable. And these are especially important qualities when it comes to interacting with our horses, because that is what allows us to really understand the nuances that are provided to us from them, and be able to appreciate just the level of softness and the level of subtlety that's possible when we reach a certain level of understanding with our horses. Good morning, Fiona. I'm having a tech issue with the volume. Oh, sorry. I hope that can everyone else hear me? Gloria, hi from Mexico. Yay, that's so cool. Hi from New Zealand. So yeah, the important thing to really get on board with is that we all experience this. We all have that feeling of like, oh, I'm not good enough, or we have that internal retractive feeling at times where we feel criticism or something isn't going well, where we think, oh, do I really have what it takes? Am I cut out for this? And maybe this just isn't my lot. when I was making the all-in pathway for Joyride, I got to the belief part because I've put together a whole module on belief systems and cultivating beneficial belief systems. And I was starting at that point, and then I realized that actually fundamental to your ability to cultivate beneficial and constructive beliefs for yourself is the understanding of a healthy worthiness cycle, a healthy shame cycle, even though that seems like it doesn't quite go together, because your sense of worthiness and your inherent sense of I'm good enoughness is intimately linked to your belief systems. And if that platform is permeable, if you are taking experiences and using them as evidence to either support a healthy sense of worthiness and self-belief, or use them as evidence to further, bash yourself over the head and say, look, you can see that I'm not good enough for this and it's just proving my point, then that really takes us in one direction or the other. So understanding the worthiness cycle, recognizing what your shame triggers are, and I think, excuse me, most importantly, recognizing the universal nature of this is really liberating, because you're so not alone in these feelings. Like, I have them, and I'm working on this stuff every day. Like, my entire day is dedicated to these types of conversations, to really, working on myself, to working with others to help them move through the same kind of challenges. And I consistently find myself coming up against the same types of thought processes that I have to actively practice differently, because that is actually the key to the whole thing. It's an active practice. Just because you have engaged in and recognized or are working on yourself in different ways doesn't mean that you don't come up against the same heartache or the same challenges or the same kinds of feelings as anyone else. It just means that you have the ability to recognize them and to attach a slightly different meaning to them, and then have the tools to actually actively work through them in a way that takes you constructively forward, rather than sees you regress back into the cycle that compounds them on themselves. And I think that's a really important thing to understand. Noreen. Hi, Anne. Hi, Darlene. Rode Bess for the first time today after her time off with injury. Oh, that's fantastic. So Noreen is an amazing Joyride member. Her horse Bess had an injury and had some time off. Use my skills learnt with Joyride to feel confident and good enough to ride her after the break. Oh, that's fantastic. And not need someone more capable to ride her before me. I'm totally doing a happy dance. That's really exciting. I'm so glad Bess is back on the scene, and well done you. That's awesome. So yeah, I think that what I would like to have a talk about now is what that worthiness cycle looks like, what it means to recognize shame triggers and what they might indicate for you and what they might look like, and then how we actually cycle in a constructive direction rather than reinforce a process which is keeping us stuck in those patterns, stuck in those thought processes. If you're asking yourself, like, how does this relate to my riding? How does this relate to my horse? Noreen's given us a really good example. In this case where she's actively putting these things into practice, she feels that she has the skills to actually jump on her horse instead of needing someone more capable, in inverted commas, to do that for her first time. But I think it's so much about what the amount of effort that we invest is really determined by our sense of worthiness and the sense of I'm good enoughness. That's what I call it. And also the intention that we use as an anchor to kind of inform how it is we are in any given situation. So what I mean by that is, if you are really under the wrath of shame or under the wrath of guilt, and that is a predominant feeling that is with you when you're out there with your horse, then you can see how that would color your perception in terms of the experiences you have. Maybe your horse is in a high energy moment, maybe they don't understand or they're confused. And what is required from you in that particular moment is to be able to recognize what's happening, to not take it personally, but to see it as feedback and information that's coming to you that is really valuable and quantifiable and something that you're able to actually proactively use to the benefit of both of you. And so if you're in that space, then you can decide, well, what is the most beneficial way forward? What does my horse need from me in order to feel calm and relaxed and able to do what it is that's required of him or her? When we are in a active shame cycle, or when that feeling of not being good enough is a really strong part of our day-to-day, life, then we can take that same information and use it as evidence to reinforce the fact that we're not good enough. And then the feelings of frustration, the feelings of anger potentially, all of those, in inverted commas, negative manifestations can come about, which prevent us or blind us from being able to take constructive action, from seeing the evidence that's being presented to us and using that in a really positive and constructive way. And instead we cycle into this negative framework, which is to the detriment of ourselves and obviously to the detriment of our horses. The thing to realize is that even if you are, even if you kind of see yourself in that scenario, the beautiful aspect of this work is that so much of this mental training, mental skills training, emotional skills training is active and necessary in your day-to-day life. So the more you practice your ability to cultivate a sense of worthiness, the more you extend your comfort zone in areas that exist outside of your riding, the more you exercise that muscle, and the easier it is to apply in situations where you feel under the pump or under pressure, or where traditionally you've shown some, some weaknesses. I don't really like using that word, but you know what I mean, some weaknesses in that area. So that's really cool as well. There's so much of a flow-on effect just by actually changing things around and implementing them in your day-to-day life. Susie, my hubby is a CEO and I'm just me, have to attend an event tonight and practicing positive talking to myself. Yeah, you're just you, but you're fabulous you. Like, I think that when we have some rules around, unconscious rules around what it means or what we need to kind of tick off in order to feel good enough or in order to feel worthy, then it can become this endless list. And what we want to start with, which is actually relating perfectly to Susie's comment, is just as it's like your universal passport. Basically, when you're born, you are absolutely worthy. Your start point, the foundation start point that all of us begin with, is you are worthy now. There are no prerequisites for you to become worthy of experiencing joy or happiness or connection or belonging. That is a birthright. And the layer upon layer of erroneous thinking that we add to our thought process tells us otherwise. But just because you think it doesn't mean that it's true. The practice then becomes the practice of worthy now, of recognizing that regardless of how you feel, you're 100% worthy, you 100% belong, and you are 100% good enough right now, just as a consequence of being human. That's non-negotiable, it's absolutely irrefutable. That is the point that you start from. And when we start to introduce prerequisites for worthiness, so once I win this competition, then I'll be worthy. Once I get this position at work, then I'll be worthy. Once I'm able to do this with my horse, then I'll be worthy. Then we get into the mouse on the wheel situation, and we're constantly looking for outside influences to reinforce or allow us to feel a certain way. When we search for outside influences to allow us to feel a certain way, we are setting ourselves up for misery because it is completely out of our control. On some occasions, on some days, things might line up and allow us to feel positive or, worthy or good enough, and that's fantastic. On other days, it won't be the case. If you're waiting for permission from someone, if you're waiting for someone to tell you that you are good or you are worthy or you can do this thing that you're dying to do, then you might be waiting a long time because everyone's dealing with the same stuff. and everyone is unreliable as the next person in terms of telling you what you need to hear in order to feel worthy. So the practice, instead of waiting for something to come from the outside, the practice is an internal one. It's taking the stand that actually what I need to do is fill my own cup and really recognize that the practice of worthiness is one that is self-cultivated, rather than waiting for, again, that permission or that marker point to come from the outside to tell me, oh, actually, now you are good enough, or now you're okay. It might happen, but waiting for that is just a fool's game. So what I want you to step into is letting go of the prerequisites, practicing worthy now, and recognizing the triggers that come about when you are when those energies or those thought processes are activated within you, which is what we're going to talk about now. And feeling worthy of competition and having an honest coach, not just a coach that tells you you're going great all the time. I get concerned that I'm not good enough and don't trust that I'm ready and feel embarrassed to show. Yeah, so there's so many interweaving components that come as a result of this. Part of the lack of worthiness and part of the not good enough also comes with the fixed mindset. And the fixed mindset tells us that when we are born, we're born with a certain amount of talent, a certain amount of ability and scope. And as a result of that, when we're coming from that framework, what we're constantly doing is setting out to defend what it is that we would like to be seen as, what it is that we would like to ultimately do, and to really make sure that we're not shown up in any way. So when you are presented with an opportunity, if you are coming from a fixed framework or a fixed mindset position, you assess that according to whether or not it has the capacity to to kind of catch you out, because you're in the need to prove yourself in that moment. You're not there to improve. You're not going into this situation with the framework of actually, like, what can I bring to this? How can I learn from this? How can I improve as a result of this? Instead, you're coming from the framework of, like, what if I can't do it and I'm shown to be a failure? What if I can't do it and I'm shown to be a fraud? And so instead of being very offensive, you're being really defensive. You're trying constantly to prove a narrative that you're telling yourself and telling other people in terms of what it is you would like them to believe. Does that make sense? So when it comes to feeling worthy of competition, you're 100% worthy of competition, but we might need to actually reframe what competition means. Competition is your commitment to improving yourself and your horse. Competition is really you competing against yourself. And I know this is perhaps an overdone phrase and you might be rolling your eyes and thinking, yeah, but is that really the case? Yes, it is really the case, because what you need to do is set up a value metric for competition that aligns with the principles that you want to ride to and the values that you want to purport in terms of the relationship between you and your horse. If I think of competition as winning and the need to prove myself, then automatically that adds a layer of pressure, which is just so unpleasant, because it's completely outside of my control to be able to fulfill those criteria. However, if I see competition as a platform for me to really express a relationship with my horse and to show everything that we've been working on in training, and for it to perhaps be reflecting back to me some of the things that I need to work on and improve, then I have a whole different framework that I'm operating from. Excuse me, still a little bit chesty. Still operating from that is completely within my control. So this is where the flip from goal orientation to process orientation becomes really important as well, and how it all interweaves back into each other. But competition has the ability to get the best or the worst out of us depending on how we frame it. And definitely feeling like you're going to be worthy, or you need to wait for a certain point to be worthy of competition. You could be waiting a really long time, because what are the rules? Like, what would be good enough, or what do you need? What do you need from competition in order to prove your worthiness? If you need to be winning all the time, if you need only good feedback, if you need everyone around you to be saying, wow, awesome job, are those commitments, are those controllable elements that you're able to exert influence over? No, you can't guarantee that you're going to win. You can't guarantee that you're going to get good feedback from everyone because it's a really subjective situation. You know, you can't guarantee that everyone's going to be saying nice things to you. It's just not possible because those things are so subjective and so highly influenceable, you know. So what you have to do is say, well, I want to do competition. Is this a desire that I have within me to compete? And then from that say, well, what is it that how can I shape competition so that it works for me and my horse? How can I shape competition so that I'm able to get out there and compete in an ethical way, in a way that doesn't compromise my values, in a way that doesn't compromise me or my horse? Because this mythical or theoretical structure that we set up for competition that, you know, is kind of looming on the horizon and tells us that we need to be a certain way to be worthy, it's imagined. You know, this is a framework that's completely imagined. It's our perception of what competition is. So if you can flip that around and say, well, how do I want to do this? Like, how would competition work for me? How can I make competition work for me? And then set up an influenceable and a framework that's 100% within your control. And always what is within your control is the processes. You can't control the results. You can only control the processes. You can't control what people say to you or think. You can only control what you think of yourself and your horse. So what would make you proud? What is within your scope of controllability that will allow you to get out there and say, this is what I'm doing with my horse. This is how we want to roll in this particular situation. And we're going to practice worthy now. Because the only way we can actually maximize our chances of getting a result is actually to engage in the process, is actually to get out there and say, today might not be the day that we win, but today can always be the day that we improve. You know, today might not be the day that everyone comes on board with what it is that we're trying to do, but today can be the day that I am there for my horse in the best way possible. And when you do that, you flip things around, you stop searching for excuses, you stop putting the onus of pressure and, you know, culpability on other people, because you remove yourself from the ability to say that was your fault, that was your fault, that was your fault, because that's not the criteria that you're writing for. You're writing for an intrinsically motivated criteria, which you're 100% in control of. And when you do that, you raise the bar because you don't have any outs. You don't have anyone else to blame. The things that are always within your control are your self-talk, how it is you're managing yourself, your level of focus, your level of resourcefulness, your level of showmanship, you know, your level of horsemanship, your level of support that you offer other people. So if you can actually flip it and say, and instead of asking yourself, like, what can competition give me that I need in order to feel worthy, say, what can I bring to this? Like, if this is the community that I want to be a part of, if this is the discipline that I want to be a part of, how can I contribute to this in the most positive way? What can I bring to this that will really allow me to further and, you know, support this beautiful place that I want to be a part of, or this beautiful thing that I want to be a part of, instead of retracting and recoiling and saying, you know, what is it going to give me? What do I need to feel worthy of being a part of it? You're automatically worthy. If you want to be a part of it, you're a part of it. That's it. There's no prerequisites. So I think that's a really important element to consider. And having an honest coach. Yeah, I mean, that's a want for all of us, most definitely. But I guess if you're coming from a place of skepticism, and there's healthy skepticism and there's unhealthy skepticism. Healthy skepticism is where you are, you know, you trust that your best interest is being taken care of until evidence shows you otherwise. But if you're going in with this idea that someone is telling you something and you're just refusing to believe it, then that could be an indication that something is slightly off in terms of your beliefs about yourself. Let me elaborate on that. Our belief systems act as a filter. So if we believe we're not good enough, or if we believe, excuse me, coughing. If we believe that we're not good enough or we're not a good rider, okay, what we do is we use that as a filter to basically take pieces from our environment that prove us right. our primary goal, or the primary goal of our unconscious mind, is to make our experiences congruent with our feelings. So we want to be in alignment. We want things to line up. We essentially want to prove ourselves right. So you can understand that in any given situation, we are thrown, we're in the midst of so much information, so much evidence, you know. If you have a writing lesson, there is so much information that's coming at you, so much information that you have to navigate in terms of actually physically being able to develop that partnership with your horse and get things going in the direction that you want, that you can't actually consciously assimilate all of that at once. I think, and I'm kind of plucking figures out of the air, but there's something like 1 to 2 million pieces of information that our unconscious mind absorbs in any given moment. Obviously, if we were to take that in consciously, we would go mad because we don't have the ability to process or filter that in an effective way. So our belief systems really provide the filter for that. They are what pick out the evidence from our environment, and the parts that we pick out are the parts that line up with our belief systems. So if you have a coach that tells you, wow, this is really going great. I think you guys could be out there next weekend or, you know, next month and competing if you want to be. And your belief is that you're not good enough to do that. You'll essentially deflect that like a boxercise class because it doesn't line up with how it is you actually feel. And so there's a degree of skepticism that comes as a result of that because actually it's out of alignment with that internal belief that you have. Some of us will have had an experience, and this is a sort of random example that I use all the time, of a friend who thinks they're overweight but actually isn't overweight. So they have the belief that I am overweight. And you can tell them you are not overweight or you look great or you're really, you know, but you can tell them as many things as you want to the contrary, but they will continue to pluck out pieces of information, even sort of conjure pieces of information that support the belief that they're overweight. Like, oh, look at this little bit of skin here, or wow, my jeans feel ever so slightly tighter. And it feels exasperating because you know that your reality is different from the reality that they're perceiving. So this is where we have to be really careful. We have to be careful that we aren't filtering out or blocking out evidence, deleting evidence that actually supports a different framework to the one that we're cultivating ourselves. And the only way around that really is to say to yourself, well, what is my dream? Like, what is my dream for my riding? And if your dream involves competition and you have a belief system that is not supportive of that, then we need to change that belief system. Belief systems in and of themselves tend to have a lot of weight because there's something that's talked about and they feel so intangible. And you can get into that state of mind where you're like, well, what are my negative beliefs? I know if they're limiting me in some way, but I don't quite know what they are. Like they feel like they're holding us hostage. All your beliefs are your most practiced thought patterns, and they come up with your intentional self-talk. So if you say to yourself, I would like to compete next weekend, and for all intents and purposes, that's a realistic proposition. And then you have this voice that pops up, the voice of the itty bitty shitty committee that goes, actually, that's blah, 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 you know, and tells you any number of things. Pay attention to that voice because that is the voice that is telling you what your limiting beliefs are. Now, just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. That's the next stage to get into. And the mistake that we make is actually to fuse ourselves with our thoughts instead of being able to create this distance and say, actually, I see what it is that I'm thinking. I don't want to put energy behind that. And this is really the first stage in divorcing yourself from negative thought process and negative belief systems. I don't want to put energy behind that. So what is the belief that I would need to cultivate in order to support where it is that I want to go and in order to support the practices that I want to be a part of? And then that's what you put energy behind. So it's not a matter of cancelling out the negative beliefs or cancelling out the beliefs that you don't want to be active in your brain space. It's more a matter of identifying them, not giving them airtime anymore, and then transferring your energy to beliefs and principles that actually are supportive of where it is that you want to go. That's the practice. That's the process. And that's a conscious process to start with. It's one where your BS radar will go off quite a lot because it feels really false. You know, if you have been practicing negative beliefs and you have been putting a lot of energy behind self-talk, which is really destructive or at least non-constructive, then flipping to an alternative can feel like a complete falsity because it's not something that's comfortable. And so you have to get used to that uncomfortableness as well until it becomes part of the narrative that you're subscribing to. Let me have a look. Katie, you've helped me a lot lately on this very subject. It's tough to be immersed in situations that are out of your comfort zone and then be belittled for it. Yeah, it wrecks your confidence in yourself. It absolutely does. And I think that what is really key to understanding worthiness and understanding those shame triggers is that this isn't something that goes away. So when you become resilient to shame and to a depleted sense of worthiness, it's not that you never feel those things in the future. It's not that you never feel uncomfortable or embarrassed or humiliated or out of your depth. It's none of those things. The difference is not in the experience of that feeling. It's in where you take it. It's in where you go from there. And that's what we could talk about now, the two different places that really leads you to. So when we have a unhealthy sense of worthiness, when we have an unhealthy sense of I'm not good enoughness, then what happens is we transform events and happenings into evidence. We take experiences and we make them evidence. And we make them evidence of what it is that we're not feeling. So if we don't feel good enough, and your horse is out and you're either riding or you're working with them on the ground, and they do something which you deem not preferable. They do something which is not what you want them to do. In an unhealthy worthiness cycle where you're not feeling good enough, you'll go, oh, see, I knew this would happen. I'm totally out of my league. I know that I'm not able to do this. And that will compound those feelings and take you obviously in an unhelpful direction. When you have the ability to recognize when you go to that place, so those same feelings come up, your horse does the same undesirable thing, you feel that same as a result of that. When you're in a healthy relationship with worthiness, then you can recognize those feelings for what they are, a trigger of that feeling or that kind of energy manifestation. And you can decide to do what I call the everyday brave option. This is the practice of everyday braveness, which is actually, instead of retracting and recoiling and going to that really dark place within you, you say, what is the brave thing for me to do in this situation? And the brave thing might be to ask for help. The brave thing might be to actually push that little bit further because you know what it is you need to do. You just have to action it. The brave thing might be to use a really good question, because when we get into negative spaces, we tend to ask, or we tend to talk to ourselves in really low quality questions like, why does this always happen to me? Why am I in this cycle? And instead, when you're in a healthy relationship with worthiness, you can say, what is the best thing for me to do in this situation? What is the next best thing I can do to get myself moving forward? So those two scenarios begin with the same experience of worthiness or lack of worthiness, but your response to them is what changes. So the practice of recognizing or developing a healthy relationship with being worthy and a healthy relationship with yourself is to recognize what happens to you when you go to that place of not feeling good enough, when you go to that place of feeling ashamed or guilty or just retracting. And generally, there's different layers to this. So sometimes if you go really into shame, so if you're criticized or you're in a place where you feel really exposed and vulnerable and someone says something to you or something happens which causes that feeling to rise up within you, there's a set of commonalities which are common to all of us. And that is, you can get that feeling of being hot. You can get that feeling of being uncomfortable. I get that feeling of what I call just get me the hell out of here, like that abort mission feeling, that beep, 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 let's just get out of here. And it feels like the best option would be just to pretend that that doesn't exist and to kind of whisk yourself away as fast as you can. However, if you can be in that and recognize the triggers and say, oh, okay, actually what I'm feeling right now is an attack to my sense of self-worth, and these old crappy belief systems are coming up, and this is what's happening right now. And as a result of me entertaining those thoughts, I'm getting these really physical responses. What would be the brave thing for me to do in this situation? What would be and that's everyday bravery. What would be the brave thing for me to do? In an unhealthy worthiness cycle, so when we're really tapping into that place where we feel kind of crappy about ourselves and this is just not working and maybe we should give it all up, then the common elements within that are retraction. So we shut ourselves off from the world and we don't want to talk about it and we don't want to go there, and we just want to confine that experience to a little box that we're going to tuck away in our minds and hearts, and we disconnect. So we don't talk about it because talking about it is somehow going to magnify that feeling. And perhaps if we talk about it, then we'll prove it right. You know, what if we actually aren't good enough and then we talk about not being good enough and that actually makes it a real thing? Whereas if we don't talk about it, perhaps there's still a glimmer of possibility that there's some hope there and we can just pretend that it's just all never happened. So the disconnect and the disassociation are the biggest elements, those that we make ourselves an island, essentially. And so the practice of worthiness, or practicing a healthy worthiness cycle, you could see is the opposite of that. It's actually saying, okay, I know that I have the innate feeling like I want to retract and disconnect from the world right now. That would be reinforcing the cycle. So what I actually need to do is lean into the process and say, what is it that I need to do right now to get me moving forward? I recognize the feelings of inferiority or lack of worthiness or not good enough. I know that that's not real. You know, I know what will actually be the most benefit to me now is to reach out and connect. And that connection, that actually talking about it, is the liberation, because it's the opposite of the natural tendency. That is the brave response in this situation. A brave response is not like getting on and manning up and riding through a dangerous situation. A brave response is having a conversation. A brave response is actually saying, I really need some help right now. I don't know quite what to do. A brave response is staying in the moment instead of fleeing and retracting. That's a brave response. And when we do that, we start to initiate a cycle of resilience, which becomes easier and easier the more we practice it. The feelings don't become easier. So even though you might be, that those feelings within you might be activated, you're still really uncomfortable. It's still really shit. Okay. But where you take it differs completely. And then off the back of that, you realize just how capable you are. Those little moments of practicing everyday bravery, where instead of retracting and recoiling, you connect and ask yourself, what is the best option for me to move forward right now? Build your mental muscles in ways you cannot imagine, because you realize even in the moments where you feel absolutely down and out, where you feel totally unworthy or totally unable to manage and move forward, you still have. Like, you still have moved forward. You still lived to see another day. It was okay. And that gives you a whole different success library to draw on next time. The recognition as well that if any of this resonates with you, which I think on some level it has to resonate with all of us because we all have this, that's the other thing. When you are ensconced in negative belief systems, when you've been experiencing anxiety for a period of time, when you lack confidence or you lack worthiness, the narrative that you start to entertain is you're the only one. You're the only one this is happening to. You're the only one that feels like this. Everyone out there is qualifying for the Olympics. You're still on the mounting block. What the hell is happening? You know, like, we all feel like that at certain times. There might be different levels to that depending on where we're at, but we all feel like that. And I'm shocked, honestly, how many times, and this happens time and time and time and time again, when people join Joyride and they join the members group, it's like, oh, the angels come up, because it's like, wow, I didn't know anyone else felt this way. I thought I was the only one who felt like this. And having a community of people who are really open and, you know, in this for the heart journey and connected to say, hell no, like, we're all in this, we're all on the same ship, is such a liberation, because you're like, there's that connection there, you know, there's that sense of normalcy there, because it is very normal. It's very normal to not feel good enough. It's very normal to feel like you don't belong. It's very normal to feel disconnected at times. We all feel like that. I feel like that. Everyone I've talked to has felt like that in different ways. And so the practice then becomes one which is internally motivated, where you can say, well, how do I remedy this? Like, how can I be the connector? How can I be the one that actually leans into this process and cultivates a beneficial response off the back of that? So next time I know what I need to do to get to second base. That's the practice. And it's an exciting one. It's a hard one, man. It's like not easy, but it's definitely the only option, because to my mind, if you continue to cut out any emotion really which you segregate, so any emotion which if you try to avoid feeling the crappy emotions, and I actually don't believe there are crappy emotions, but you know what I mean when I refer to that, ones that we would typically describe as negative. If you cut those off, you cut off the other end of the scale. So the more you avoid the lower ones, the more you avoid the higher ones. And you kind of get into this stalemate of mediocrity, which doesn't allow you to experience really joyful elements of horsemanship or even life. But you might simultaneously be avoiding the difficult ones, but it's the difficult ones that give rise to the highs. So there's a reframing there, you know, that in order to be vulnerable, in order to be open to everything, you're going to have to experience some of the hard stuff, but you're really also receptive to the highs. And that's the beauty, you know, that's the beauty of the entire thing, really. Just before we sign off, because I know there's been kind of a lot that we've talked about today, I wanted to talk about some of the positive manifestations of shame as well, or the positive benefit of shame, because there is always a positive. There's a positive to everything that we experience. And shame and anger have this really dynamic relationship. So anger is very much about external boundaries. It's about boundaries being breached, or a sense of violation that's occurred in either your physical space or your emotional space. And so the need to reassert those boundaries is really what anger, the positive manifestation of anger, is. And when we're in a place where we're able to define our own boundaries and to honor those boundaries on a day-to-day basis, then we don't get to the usual expressions of anger that we might typically recognize, such as those really overexpressed manifestations, or similarly the suppression of anger, which is really toxic in and of itself. So shame is about our internal boundaries. And when we feel guilt or shame, it calls us to really examine what it is that we've done and our behavior and our actions to make sure they're in alignment with what it is that we value and who it is that we want to be as horse people and as people in general. So if you can use that as a gentle reminder as well, to say, what about this situation is triggering me? And is there something that I can take from it that's positive? Like, is there a feeling of letting myself down in some way? Like, is there some internal boundary that's been breached that I need to address or repair or reinforce that will allow me to not feel this again in the same way? And thinking of it like that just makes sure that you really honor the message behind what it is that the emotion is bringing to you. It's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes people are just asshats and you have this feeling of shame even though it's not warranted and really nothing to do with you. And at that point, that gives you a chance to practice that feeling of being worthy now, that absolutely you're in the place where you can deal with this effectively and constructively and move forward in whatever way you need to move forward. But in the other instance where you're like, actually, this is really triggering me because it's tapping into something which I'd rather not think about or talk about, then you have an opportunity. Then it's an opportunity to do the work that you need to do to actually do whatever it is, you know, you need to do to get to the place that you need to get to. And I know that's kind of an ambiguous answer, but it's so specific depending on the situation. It's specific depending on what you feel like needs to be repaired or finely tuned. Yeah. Hello, what can I bring to competition? Yeah, so I'm just having a look at the comments to see if there's any. Awesome. Hi, Mary. It doesn't, yeah, it's easy to hit the wrong emoji, don't worry. All right, guys. Well, I'm honestly so keen to hear your thoughts. It's sort of a big melting pot of discussion in there, but it's a really fascinating subject, and I think a really important one because it affects us in so many ways in our relationships with our horses, you know, in with family, at work. The Your sense of worthiness and your sense of being good enough is like a, um, a point which really informs how you navigate your way through life. So understanding that the universality, what would be the right word there, of this condition, of this feeling is important in recognizing that you're a part of it, but you're not the only person that goes through this. And that your inherent start point is one of total worthiness. Yeah, you're absolutely good enough. Absolutely good enough. And it's just a matter of delineating the processes and practices for yourself that will allow you to experience that and to really you know, step into a joyful way of going about things. All right, lovelies. I hope you have a fabulous day. I'm looking forward to reading your comments. If you want to join me in Joyride, always be a pleasure. I'll pop that link in the comments for you. But until tomorrow, we'll be back. I'm not quite sure what tomorrow's topic is. I should always look that up before I jump on. I seem to always be forgetting. But same time tomorrow, I'll be here, so I'll see you then. Have a great day. Bye.